Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
Rachel Garden was last seen on the evening of March 22, 1980, in Newton, New Hampshire, a small town with a population of around 3,000 people at the time. Rachel, who was 15 years old at the time of her disappearance, was the oldest of 4 children. She had a good relationship with her family, though she sometimes argued about having to babysit her younger siblings, a relatable frustration for many teenagers. Described as fun-loving, friendly, outspoken, and sometimes rebellious, she was also a freshman at Sanborn Regional High School. Despite occasional frustration with her parents' rules, she was generally seen as a good kid. However, Rachel sometimes skipped class to drink alcohol and smoke with other students in the woods near Maple Avenue, which some speculate may have contributed to her disappearance. Rachel also had a deep love for animals, particularly for her horse, which she spent much of her free time caring for and riding. Her connection to her horse makes the idea that she ran away voluntarily highly unlikely, as she would never have willingly abandoned the animal she loved so much. On the evening of March 22, 1980, Rachel walked from her home to Rose Corner Market, a small convenience store located on Route 108 in Newton, where she was a regular customer. She purchased chewing gum and a pack of cigarettes with a $5 bill, collected her change, and left the store. The owner of the market reported seeing Rachel walking north on Main Street after leaving the store, which aligned with what her family believed, that she was heading to a friend's house for a sleepover. However, Rachel never arrived at her friend's house that night. The following morning, on March 23, 1980, when Rachel did not return home, her mother immediately knew something was wrong and reported her missing to police around 10 a.m. When police investigated, they spoke to the friend Rachel had supposedly been staying with, only to learn that the friend had no idea that Rachel was supposed to stay over. In fact, they had made no such plans. This revelation raised immediate red flags. Rachel had told her family one thing, but her plans seemed to be different. Had she simply lied about where she was going to cover up different plans? If so, where was she really going, and who was she with that night? Initially, Rachel was classified as a runaway by authorities, which significantly delayed the urgency of the investigation. This was not uncommon in the 1980s when missing teenagers, especially those who had previously expressed dissatisfaction with parental rules, were often assumed to have left voluntarily. This critical misclassification meant that essential time in the first 24 to 48 hours, when missing persons cases are most solvable, was lost. However, Rachel had left all her belongings behind, including her personal items and clothes, making it highly unlikely that she had actually planned to run away. She had also left behind her beloved horse, a fact that convinced her family that she would never have voluntarily disappeared. Despite the initial delay in treating Rachel's case as suspicious, volunteers, police dogs, and helicopters conducted extensive searches of the woods and surrounding areas near where she was last seen. However, no evidence was ever found, not a single clue as to what happened to Rachel that night. Years after Rachel's disappearance, 2 witnesses came forward and claimed to have seen her talking with 3 men in a dark-colored car near Rose Corner Market on the night she vanished. According to the witnesses, Rachel appeared to know the men, and they were known in the community as troublemakers with criminal backgrounds. The most disturbing part of this new lead? One of the men was later convicted of assault and rape. Despite this information, authorities have never publicly named these men or confirmed whether they were ever officially questioned. In an even more chilling development, one of these men allegedly confessed to killing Rachel while drinking at a bar in Haverhill, Massachusetts, a town not far from Newton. His confession led investigators to excavate a site near Route 108 beside a stone wall and a stream, but no remains were found. The lack of physical evidence has made it impossible for police to determine whether the confession was genuine, whether it was a false statement made for attention, or whether he was simply lying. Adding to the strangeness of the case, police received several tips over the years about potential burial sites. At different points, law enforcement teams conducted excavations in wooded areas and near a stone wall, but no evidence was recovered. In the 1990s, New Hampshire State Police's Major Crime Unit excavated a 60-square-foot area of wooded land in Newton, believing it might contain Rachel's remains. Unfortunately, the search turned up nothing. Despite decades of investigative efforts, Rachel's whereabouts remain unknown, and her case has gone cold. In 2008, authorities received a tip that led them to search Ice Pond and Country Pond, two bodies of water near where Rachel was last seen. Police used sonar and GPS equipment to scan the bottom of Ice Pond, while divers spent 2 days searching Country Pond. However, nothing related to Rachel's disappearance was found. One particularly disturbing theory suggests that Rachel may have been abducted and disposed of in a body of water or in the dense forests surrounding Newton. Given that Newton is close to the New Hampshire-Massachusetts border and only a short drive from the coastline, if her body had been placed in a river, lake, or ocean, it may never be found. Adding to the frustration, some unconfirmed sightings of Rachel were reported in Haverhill and Hampton Beach, though none were ever verified. In 2013, a tip was passed to the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit, but the details of this tip remain unknown to the public. Authorities have never disclosed what information they received or if it led to any new developments. To this day, Rachel's case remains classified as a missing persons case, rather than a homicide, which some find suspicious. Typically, when law enforcement believes a missing person has been murdered, the classification changes, but Rachel's has remained unchanged. In 2024, it has been 44 years since Rachel vanished. Despite searches, excavations, and leads over the years, no trace of her has ever been found. Her dental records and DNA are on file, meaning that if any remains are found, they can be tested against her DNA to confirm an identity. Rachel's family eventually moved out of the area, no doubt devastated by decades without answers. Despite their efforts, hiring private investigators, consulting with psychics, following up on leads, Rachel was never found. Her case has been covered by various news outlets over the years, including NBC News, the Eagle Tribune, and the Charlie Project, all in an effort to keep her story alive. But the truth remains elusive. Did Rachel leave the store that night with someone she knew, only to meet foul play? Was she lured into a vehicle by people she trusted? Was she abducted by a stranger? Or is her body hidden somewhere, waiting to be found? Authorities still urge the public to come forward with any information about what happened to Rachel. Sometimes, even the smallest detail can crack a case wide open. For 44 years, Rachel Garden's disappearance has haunted Newton, New Hampshire. Someone out there knows the truth, and until they come forward, Rachel's fate will remain a mystery. Denise Daynault was last seen in the early hours of June 8, 1980, as she left a private social club in downtown Manchester, New Hampshire. She had told others she was heading to a party, but from that moment forward, she was never seen or heard from again. Despite years of speculation and investigation, her case remains a haunting mystery, one that has only grown more complex with time as authorities have uncovered potential connections to one of the region's most notorious killers. Denise was 25 years old when she vanished. A divorced mother of 2 young sons, she lived with a roommate in an apartment on Hayward Street, a residential area in Manchester. She was known as a responsible woman, deeply devoted to her children. It was entirely uncharacteristic of her to simply disappear without warning. When she failed to return home and no one heard from her, alarm bells quickly sounded. But in 1980, missing adults, especially young women, were often assumed to have left voluntarily. That perception slowed down the urgency of law enforcement's response. Unfortunately, as days turned into weeks and then into years, it became increasingly clear that Denise had not left by choice. Adding to the eerie nature of her disappearance was the fact that just 6 weeks earlier, Another young woman had vanished under similarly strange circumstances. 14-year-old Laureen Ron lived just 2 blocks away on Merrimack Street and disappeared from her home on April 26, 1980. The resemblance between the two cases was unsettling. Both women had similar facial features and hair color, despite the 11-year age difference. They were both from the same neighborhood, and they both went missing within a short time frame. It seemed impossible that there wasn't some connection between them. However, as years passed, no definitive link was ever established, and authorities could not say for sure whether the two cases were related. What made Denise's case all the more disturbing was the fact that she had lived just a few doors down from one of the most dangerous serial killers New Hampshire had ever seen, Terry Petter Rasmussen. A chameleon-like predator who assumed multiple identities throughout his life. Rasmussen had lived in Manchester under the alias Bob Evans at the time of Denise's disappearance. He was later revealed to be responsible for the brutal Bear Brook murders, in which 4 bodies, an adult woman and 3 young girls, were discovered in barrels in Allenstown, New Hampshire, near Bear Brook State Park. Investigators believe he killed them sometime between the late 1970s and early 1980s. Rasmussen's crimes stretched across multiple states and spanned decades. But it wasn't until years after his death in 2010 that the full extent of his monstrous acts came to light. In 2017, DNA evidence confirmed that the adult female victim in the barrels was Marlies Elizabeth Honeychurch, and 2 of the children were her daughters, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn and Sarah Lynn McQuarters. The 3rd child in the barrel, a little girl around 2 to 4 years old, was confirmed to be Rasmussen's biological daughter, but her identity remains unknown. Her remains suggest she may have had mixed ancestry, including Caucasian, Native American, African American, and Asian heritage, and isotope analysis suggests she was likely born in a western U.S. state. With the revelation of Rasmussen's horrific crimes, authorities began looking into the possibility that he may have been involved in the disappearance of other women from the area, including Denise Daynault. While no direct evidence has linked him to her case, the circumstantial factors are chilling. Denise lived on the same street as Rasmussen at the time of her disappearance. He was known to target young women with children. He had a history of luring women into relationships before ultimately killing them. It's entirely possible that Denise, a struggling single mother, may have crossed paths with Rasmussen, unaware of the danger he posed. Investigators continue to explore whether Denise could have been another of his victims. They have reviewed case files, revisited potential evidence, and worked to establish connections between Rasmussen's movements and Denise's last known whereabouts. In 2014, law enforcement retrieved old evidence that had been overlooked for decades, clothing that may have belonged to another missing woman from the same area. These items were recovered from a suspect's home and were supposed to undergo DNA testing, but it remains unclear if that ever happened. If a forensic link between Denise and Rasmussen were ever established, it could finally provide the answers that her family has waited for over 40 years. Denise's parents held on to hope for many years, but in 1996, 16 years after her disappearance, she was declared legally dead. Her case remains open, but with no body, no confirmed crime scene, and no witnesses, investigators have struggled to make progress. What they do know is that Denise didn't simply walk away from her life. She didn't abandon her children, her home, or her responsibilities. Something happened to her that night in June of 1980. On the morning of November 13th, 1984, 8-year-old Tammy Belanger set out on the short walk to Lincoln Street School in Exeter, New Hampshire, just as she did every day. She was a bright, brown-haired girl with strikingly crossed eyes, a defining feature in her photos. Tammy had no reason to suspect that this day would be any different from any other. Her biggest concerns should have been schoolwork and playing with friends. But she never arrived at school that morning. She never walked through the front doors, never took her seat, and never returned home that afternoon. Tammy was simply gone. What makes this case so chilling is how quickly she seemed to have vanished. She lived just a short distance from her school, a route she had walked many times before. Her parents, teachers, and the entire town were in disbelief. How does an 8-year-old girl disappear in a thin air on a familiar path in broad daylight? But as investigators soon realized, this was no accident. Someone had been waiting for Tammy, someone who was watching, planning, and ready to strike. Tammy's parents, Nelson and Arlene Belanger, were devastated when they learned she had never made it to school. When Tammy failed to return home that afternoon, panic set in. By the time authorities were involved, the school had confirmed that she had never arrived that morning. There was no record of her being inside the building. That meant something had happened to her on her short walk to school. Exeter, a quiet New England town, had never experienced anything like this before. No one in the small, tight-knit community could believe that a child had been snatched off the street in their own backyard. Parents who once felt safe letting their kids walk to school suddenly feared for their children's safety. The streets, once filled with the sounds of children playing, now carried the heavy silence of uncertainty. Within hours, police and local volunteers combed the neighborhood, searching every inch of the route Tammy should have taken that morning. But there was nothing. No signs of a struggle. No dropped belongings. No witnesses who saw exactly what had happened. It was as if she had simply evaporated into the cold November air. Authorities launched a massive search effort. Helicopters, police officers, K-9 units, and volunteers scoured the town, nearby forests, and every possible area where a child could have gone. But there was no sign of Tammy anywhere. It was as if she had been plucked from existence in an instant. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Despite relentless searches, no leads emerged. The Belangers were left clinging to hope, desperate for any sign of their little girl. Then, an alarming lead surfaced, one that would take the investigation in a dark and horrifying direction. As law enforcement dug deeper, they uncovered the name of a man who had been lurking in the shadows of New Hampshire, Victor Wanyutai. Wanyutai was no stranger to law enforcement. He was a convicted child predator, a serial sex offender who had a history of targeting young girls. Investigators soon realized that he had been in Exeter at the time of Tammy's disappearance. Even more disturbingly, he had worked at a car repair and salvage shop located along Tammy's walking route to school. This meant he could have easily seen Tammy every morning, studying her routine, learning the exact moment she would be alone. Witnesses reported seeing a suspicious blue sedan in the area that day, a car that matched the description of a vehicle Wanyutai was known to have access to. Even more chilling? When police searched Wanyutai's home in Florida years later, they found photographs of young girls. Some of the images were confirmed as missing children. Others were never identified. One of the pictures was initially believed to be Tammy Belanger, but shockingly, it wasn't her. This begged the terrifying question. Who was the girl in the photo? Was she alive? Had she suffered the same fate as Tammy? And just how many victims had Wanyutai left in his wake? Investigators also linked Wanyutai to another missing child case. Marjorie Christie Luna, an 8-year-old girl from Green Acres, Florida, who had vanished just 6 months before Tammy. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Both were 8-year-old girls, both disappeared while walking alone, and both cases had no witnesses, no evidence, and no traces left behind. The pieces were starting to form a horrific picture, one that suggested Wanyutai had been preying on children up and down the East Coast, from Florida to New Hampshire, possibly for years. Despite mounting suspicions, authorities never had enough concrete evidence to charge Wanyutai in connection with Tammy's disappearance. But theories surrounding her fate have haunted investigators and the community for decades. One of the most chilling theories suggests that Wanyutai, who worked at the salvage yard along Tammy's route to school, may have hidden her body in the trunk of a car that was later crushed. The idea was horrifying. The salvage yard crushed cars for scrap metal. If Tammy's body had been hidden inside, it would have been completely destroyed when the car was flattened. Once crushed, the metal would have been melted down or disposed of in ways that would leave no trace of her remains. However, skeptics argue that blood or tissue evidence should have been noticed during the crushing process. Yet, with the way industrial scrap metal is processed, it's entirely possible that no one would have seen anything unusual. Another possibility is that Tammy was placed in a dumpster before being taken to a landfill. Authorities discovered that the day Tammy went missing, Many industrial businesses had their trash picked up. All trash from the area was taken to a central landfill in Rochester, New Hampshire, which had been capped off years later. If Tammy had been placed in a dumpster, her remains would likely never be found. This theory is particularly terrifying because it would explain why there has never been a single piece of physical evidence in her case. Some believe that Wanyatai kidnapped Tammy and took her out of state. Given his criminal record and history of traveling up and down the East Coast, he could have taken her to another location, where she was either held captive or killed. It's also possible that there were other victims, girls whose disappearances have never been linked to Wanyatai. In 2009, New Hampshire established a cold case unit to re-examine unsolved crimes, including Tammy's case. Investigators have never stopped searching for answers, but after nearly 40 years, they are no closer to finding out what truly happened. Tammy's parents never gave up hope of finding out what happened to their daughter, but both of them passed away without ever knowing the truth. Victor Wanyatai, the prime suspect in Tammy's disappearance, died in prison in 2012. If he knew what happened, he took that secret to the grave. Tammy's case remains one of the most heartbreaking cold cases in New Hampshire history. She was just an innocent child, walking to school on a November morning, unaware that a predator had been watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Even though decades have passed, Tammy Belanger is not forgotten. Someone out there still holds the key to this mystery, and her family, friends, and the entire town of Exeter are still waiting for answers. It was the early hours of March 17, 2020, when 23-year-old Amanda Grzuski was last seen alive. She had been staying with a friend at an apartment on Birch Street in Derry, New Hampshire, a small town of about 33,000 people nestled between Manchester and the Massachusetts border. But something happened that night, something that led Amanda to vanish without a trace. She reportedly left the apartment in the early morning hours, taking nothing with her. She didn't bring her purse. She didn't bring her phone. She didn't even bring any extra clothes or essentials. And from that moment on, no one ever saw her again. Amanda's family would later describe her disappearance as completely out of character. Despite her struggles, despite the instability in her life, she always made a point to stay in touch with someone. Whether it was a friend, her mother, or someone from her past, Amanda was never the type to go completely silent. She had been transient, bouncing from place to place, but she was never just gone. And that's why, as days turned into weeks without any word from her, the fear of foul play became impossible to ignore. As investigators began to piece together Amanda's last known movements, they uncovered a few troubling details. Before she vanished, Amanda had sent text messages to someone about wanting to move to Salem, New Hampshire. This in itself wasn't necessarily strange. She had spent time in Salem before, along with Hooksett, Manchester, and Nashua. She had no car and relied on others for transportation, but she had been able to navigate her way between different cities despite her situation. What stood out to investigators, though, was the fact that the number she had been texting belonged to a burner phone, an untraceable, prepaid device that left no digital footprint. Who had she been communicating with? Why had she wanted to go to Salem? And was she meeting someone that night? Adding to the mystery, about 9 days after Amanda disappeared, an alarming discovery was made. Her Social Security card was found lying on the ground outside Elliott Hospital in Manchester, nearly 20 miles away from where she was last seen. There was no explanation for how it got there. Did Amanda drop it? Did someone else put it there? Was she in Manchester after she disappeared? These questions only deepened the uncertainty surrounding her case. Amanda's background made her vulnerable. She had struggled with drug addiction since her teenage years, a battle that had taken her in and out of various living situations. She had dropped out of high school and resisted attempts by her mother to get her into rehabilitation programs. Her mother, who had taken custody of Amanda's young daughter, tried repeatedly to get her the help she needed, but Amanda had never been able to break free from the cycle of addiction. Still, despite the turmoil, she never went more than a week without reaching out to someone. That's what made her disappearance so chilling. Something was different this time. Police questioned everyone they could, including those who had been with Amanda on the night she disappeared. But no one seemed to have any solid answers. Some people speculated that she may have overdosed and that someone, afraid of getting in trouble, had disposed of her body. Others suspected that she had been lured into a dangerous situation by the person she had been texting. Given her known struggles with addiction, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that Amanda had become involved with the wrong people who might not have cared whether she lived or died. Then there was the possibility that Amanda's disappearance had been intentional, that she had simply decided to leave and start fresh somewhere else. But if that were the case, why would she have left behind all of her belongings? Why would she have abandoned her daughter, the one person in her life that she always tried to check in on, even if from a distance? If she had planned to leave, why was there no sign of her anywhere? No social media activity, no financial transactions, no confirmed sightings. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist after that night. As time passed, the leads grew cold. The burner phone Amanda had texted was never linked to an owner. The person or people she may have been meeting in Salem, if that was her true destination, never came forward. The discovery of her Social Security card outside Elliott Hospital only added to the confusion, but led to no concrete breakthroughs. No security footage, no witnesses, no answers. By 2024, 4 years after her disappearance, Amanda Grzycki remained one of New Hampshire's most baffling missing persons cases. Her mother continued to search for answers, refusing to give up hope that someday someone would come forward with information. The pain of not knowing what happened to her daughter was unbearable, but what haunted her even more was the fear that Amanda had met a fate far worse than simply running away. Authorities still believe that someone knows something. Whether Amanda was the victim of foul play, an accidental overdose that someone covered up, or a tragic series of events that led her to vanish into the unknown, there are people out there who hold the missing pieces of this puzzle. Someone knows who she was texting. Someone knows why she wanted to go to Salem. Someone knows where she went after she walked out of that Birch Street apartment in the early morning hours of March 17, 2020. William and his brother Charles Vossler disappeared from Rochester, New Hampshire, on October 9, 1986, victims of parental abduction at the hands of their non-custodial father, Charles Martin Vossler Jr. The case remains one of the most infamous and enduring family abduction cases in U.S. history, as their whereabouts remain unknown nearly 4 decades later. The abduction was carefully planned, with Vossler orchestrating every detail well in advance. He had obtained full custody of 3-year-old Charles and 2-year-old William, and their mother, Ruth Parker, had limited visitation rights at the time. She never saw her children again after that October day. According to Parker, Vossler had told her that he was taking the boys out of state for the weekend to visit relatives. However, when the weekend ended and the children did not return, Parker began to worry. She went to Vossler's real estate office, where she discovered a shocking scene. He had shut down his business, fired all his employees, and vanished without a trace. Vossler had left no photographs of the children behind, as if attempting to erase their existence from anyone who might try to find them. He had also taken Parker's address books, credit cards, and several of her personal belongings, further severing any financial or informational ties she might have used to track him. Additionally, he had emptied their joint bank accounts and auctioned off family possessions, leaving Parker in an immediate financial crisis. As Parker dug deeper, she realized that this abduction had been meticulously premeditated. Vossler had removed her name from their joint checking accounts and stopped the automatic payments on her car loan months prior to the abduction, allowing her vehicle to be on the verge of repossession, a fact she was completely unaware of. As authorities began investigating, they uncovered disturbing insights into Vossler's past. He had been married twice before, and when he divorced his first wife, he reportedly told her she was lucky they had no children because he would have taken them away from her. This pattern of control suggested that his abduction of William and Charles had been planned for years. A private investigator who worked on the case believes that Vossler deliberately selected Parker to bear his children, considering her high intelligence and strong family background. It is suspected that he had always intended to take the children and raise them on his own, completely cutting their mother out of their lives. Vossler's final movements before he disappeared indicate a high level of sophistication in evading capture. He may have been traveling in a 1979 GMC Jimmy truck with either a Nebraska license plate or a Virginia plate. He had numerous personal connections across multiple states, including Connecticut, New Jersey, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and Florida. One of the most notable breaks in the case came in 1987, when a woman living in Stillwell, Oklahoma, who had been romantically involved with Vossler, recognized the boys' faces on a missing child poster and called the authorities. At the time, Vossler was using the alias Dr. Charles Wilson. He had been living a completely new life under a different identity. When law enforcement rushed to the scene 9 days later, they discovered that Vossler had set his house, car, and some of his belongings on fire before disappearing once again. This brazen act not only destroyed potential evidence, but it also delayed any further investigative leads, allowing him ample time to flee. Years later, another potential sighting emerged in December 2006, once again placing Vossler in Oklahoma. However, by the time authorities tried to track him, he had once again vanished without a trace. Parker, who has since moved to North Carolina, has never given up hope that her children, now grown men, will one day reach out to her and confirm their well-being. However, there has been no confirmed contact with either William or Charles since they were taken as toddlers in 1986. The case is complicated by the passage of time. The two boys are now in their 40s, and it is entirely possible that they were raised with false information about their mother or may not even know they were abducted. Given their ages at the time of the abduction, they may have no memory of their mother or the circumstances surrounding their disappearance. Despite being one of the longest-running family abduction cases in the country, Charles Martin Vossler Jr. has never been apprehended. He remains one of the FBI's most wanted parental kidnappers, and the federal warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution remains active. Vossler, who would be in his 80s today, is considered armed and dangerous. Investigators warn the public that if he is spotted, he should not be approached, and law enforcement should be contacted immediately. The mystery surrounding William and Charles's fate remains unresolved. Were they given new names? Do they know their real identities? Were they moved outside the United States? Did Vossler continue to manipulate them well into adulthood? What is clear is that one man's selfish decision robbed two children of a relationship with their mother and denied Parker the chance to raise her sons. Decades later, she continues to wait for answers, hoping that someday, William and Charles will discover the truth and reconnect with the family they never had the chance to know. If anyone has any information regarding the whereabouts of William and Charles Vossler, or their father, Charles Martin Vossler Jr., they are urged to contact authorities. A tip, no matter how small, could finally bring closure to a case that has haunted a mother for nearly 40 years. Harmony Montgomery was last seen in Manchester, New Hampshire, sometime in late 2019, though her disappearance was not reported until nearly 2 years later. Her case is one of the most tragic and disturbing child disappearance cases in recent history, highlighting the systemic failures of the child welfare system and the horrific abuse she endured at the hands of her father, Adam Montgomery. The timeline of Harmony's final days is unclear, but it is believed she vanished sometime between November 28th and December 10th, 2019. By that time, multiple people had seen Harmony with her father and stepmother, but by December 6th to December 10th, the couple was only seen with their other children. Harmony was no longer present. The first report of Harmony's disappearance did not come until November 2021, when her mother, Crystal Cries Renee Sorey, contacted authorities. She told police that she had been trying to find her daughter for months and that she had a gut feeling that something was wrong. Harmony's early years were marked by instability. Her mother, Cries, had lost custody of her due to substance abuse issues when Harmony was just 2 months old in 2014. At the time, Harmony's father, Adam Montgomery, was in prison and unable to care for her. Harmony was placed into foster care, where she was later joined by her younger half-brother. The two children remained together in the same foster home for several years, and their foster family described Harmony as a sweet but traumatized child. Despite the foster parents' love for her, the instability of her situation caused her significant emotional distress. She was returned to her mother's custody multiple times, only to be removed again and placed back in the same foster home. After one such removal, she was placed into a therapeutic foster care setting designed for children with emotional, behavioral, or medical challenges. By 2019, Harmony's case had been in and out of the child welfare system for years. Cries had been in recovery and was fighting to regain custody of her daughter. But despite her progress, a judge ruled to place Harmony in the custody of her father, Adam Montgomery, in February 2019. This decision was made despite Adam's history of violence, criminal behavior, and incarceration. Adam Montgomery had been incarcerated for the first year of Harmony's life and had only spent about 20 hours total with her in supervised visits over the years. Despite this, a New Hampshire judge granted him custody, removing Harmony from foster care and placing her in a home where she would ultimately suffer unimaginable abuse. Harmony's last confirmed sighting was in late 2019, around the time her family was evicted from their home on Guildford Street in Manchester. Although multiple people reported seeing her with her father and stepmother in late November, by early December, she was no longer seen with them. When authorities finally located Adam Montgomery in December 2021, he was living in his car and refused to cooperate with the investigation. He initially claimed he had given Harmony back to her mother around Thanksgiving 2019, but this was a lie. Harmony's uncle, Kevin Montgomery, later revealed that he had witnessed Adam physically abusing her in mid-2019. He recalled seeing Harmony with a black eye and, when he confronted Adam about it, Adam admitted that he had bashed her around the apartment after she had tried to stop her baby brother from crying. Kevin also described other cruel punishments, such as forcing Harmony to stand in a corner for 4 hours and making her scrub the toilet with her toothbrush. Kevin and other family members reported Adam to New Hampshire's Division of Children, Youth, and Families multiple times, but no action was taken. DSYF never intervened, and Harmony remained in Adam's custody. In January 2022, Adam Montgomery was arrested and charged with felony second-degree assault for the summer 2019 abuse of Harmony. He was also charged with interference with custody and endangering the welfare of a child for failing to report his daughter missing. Shortly after Adam's arrest, his wife and Harmony's stepmother, Kayla Montgomery, was also arrested. She was charged with welfare fraud for collecting over $1,500 in food stamps on Harmony's behalf between December 2019 and June 2021, even though Harmony was no longer in their custody and had likely been dead for years. Kayla later cooperated with authorities, providing horrifying details about Harmony's final moments. According to her, Harmony was killed by Adam on December 7, 2019. The family had been living in their car, and Harmony had an accident, wetting herself inside the vehicle. Adam, enraged, punched her repeatedly in the head. After a few minutes, he said, "I think I really hurt her this time. I think I did something." Harmony moaned for about 5 minutes before going silent. Kayla and Adam did not check on her until later that day, when they realized she was no longer breathing. Instead of reporting her death, Adam hid Harmony's body in a duffel bag and kept it in the trunk of their car. Over the following months, Harmony's body was moved multiple times, sometimes being placed in a cooler, hidden in a shelter ceiling, or stored in a restaurant freezer where Adam worked. By March 2020, Adam disposed of Harmony's remains in the Tobin Bridge area of Massachusetts. Despite extensive searches, Harmony's body has never been found. In October 2022, Adam was officially charged with murder, falsifying evidence, abuse of a corpse, and witness tampering. His trial began in 2024, but he refused to attend. Through his attorney, he maintained his innocence and blamed Kayla for Harmony's death. However, after a painstaking trial, he was found guilty on all charges in February 2024. In May 2024, Adam Montgomery was sentenced to a minimum of 56 years in prison, on top of the 32 years he was already serving for unrelated firearms charges. The prosecution offered to reduce his sentence if he would reveal where Harmony's remains were located, but he refused to cooperate. Despite his conviction, Harmony's body has never been found, leaving her family without closure. The case has sparked widespread outrage, leading to significant reforms in the child welfare system in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Investigations into the failures of DCYF and the courts revealed critical errors in handling Harmony's case, including their decision to place her with Adam despite red flags. Despite the tragic outcome, Harmony's story has not been forgotten. Her case continues to bring attention to the failures in child protective services, and advocates are fighting to ensure no other child suffers the same fate. Harmony Montgomery should have been safe. Instead, she was failed at every turn. And now, the only thing left for her family and the world is to seek justice and ensure her story is never repeated. Dylan Sanford was last seen in Somersworth, New Hampshire, on December 5, 2018. He had spent the previous night at a residence on Market Street and, between 6 o'clock and 7 p.m., left to purchase cigarettes from either the Borderline Beverage Store or the State Line Mini Mart. He never returned. Later that evening, Sanford made a distressing phone call to the mother of his 4-year-old son. He informed her that he had suffered an accidental drug overdose and had to be revived with Narcan. This call was the last known contact anyone had with him. 3 days after his disappearance, his wallet was discovered in a yard approximately half a mile away from where he was last seen. Strangely, the wallet contained only a medical identification card belonging to the mother of his son, with no cash or other personal items present. In September 2019, graffiti began appearing throughout the Tri-Cities area of New Hampshire, including in public parks and bus stops, alleging that Sanford had been murdered and naming 3 specific individuals as responsible. That same month, federal authorities executed a search warrant at a residence in the 100 block of Franklin Street in Somersworth after receiving a tip that Sanford had been there. However, the search yielded no results, and his whereabouts remained unknown. Sanford had recently completed a 30-day drug rehabilitation program prior to his disappearance. His family firmly believes that he is deceased and that his disappearance is linked to drug-related activity. Despite struggling with addiction, Sanford was considered high-functioning. He maintained regular contact with his son and ran a profitable carpet installation business at the time. His loved ones insist that he would not have abandoned his child, reinforcing their belief that foul play was involved. As the years pass, Sanford's case remains unsolved, that the circumstances surrounding his disappearance, including the cryptic phone call, the discovery of his wallet, and the allegations of murder painted in graffiti, have only deepened the mystery. Authorities continue to investigate, but without new evidence or witness cooperation, the fate of Dylan Sanford remains unknown. The case of Tina and Bethany Sinclair remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in New Hampshire's history, particularly in the small, quiet towns of West Chesterfield and Hinsdale. On February 3, 2001, 35-year-old Tina Sinclair and her 15-year-old daughter Bethany went missing from their home at 182 Mountain Road in West Chesterfield, a house they shared with Tina's boyfriend, Eugene W. Bowman Jr. Their disappearance captured the attention of the entire community and has left lingering questions that have yet to be answered. Tina and Bethany had recently moved from Florida to Brattleboro, Vermont, to live with Tina's sister, Sharon Geary. A month later, Tina began dating Bowman, and she and Bethany moved into his home in West Chesterfield. While at first, their relationship seemed fine, Tina's sister noted that Bowman's behavior became controlling over time, and things turned especially dark when Tina discovered that he was being prosecuted for sexual assaults against minors. This was not his first offense. In the 1990s, Bowman had been charged with molesting his own 8-year-old daughter. Despite this, he only served 2 years in jail. Tina's sister urged her to leave Bowman and move to Connecticut, but Tina refused, saying she had a plan. What that plan was remains unknown. The last time Tina was seen was at work on Friday, February 2, 2001, while Bethany was last seen returning home from a date with her boyfriend at around 11:30 p.m. on February 3rd. She spoke with him over the phone until midnight, and that was the last time anyone heard from her. According to Bowman, he and Tina had an argument on February 4th, and he left the house. When he returned later that day, both Tina and Bethany were gone. He claimed that he thought they had called for a ride and would be back soon. However, Tina's car was still in the driveway with a flat tire. Most of their belongings were left behind, including Tina's 15-year-old cat. On February 5th, an unknown woman called Bethany's school, Keene High School, claiming that Bethany would not be attending class. However, Bethany never returned to school, and after multiple absences, the school contacted authorities. On February 10th, Tina and Bethany were officially reported missing. Bowman was questioned, but never formally named a suspect. Reports indicated that he was seen on the Connecticut River in his hovercraft in the early morning hours of February 4th. Authorities searched his home and surrounding areas, including the Connecticut River, Pisgah State Park, and nearby locations, but found no conclusive evidence. In 2014, dive teams conducted another search near the Vernon Dam in Hinsdale, but to no avail. Despite ongoing efforts, no solid evidence has surfaced regarding their fate. Bowman has refused to cooperate with authorities and has had multiple run-ins with the law since their disappearance, including a parole violation in 2006. However, he has never been charged in connection with their case. Tina's mother, Mary Lewis, and sister, Sharon Geary, were among the strongest advocates for justice in their case, but tragically, both passed away without ever receiving answers. Bethany's older cousin, as well as many community members, continue to seek justice, refusing to let their memory fade. To this day, there has been no activity on Tina's or Bethany's social security numbers, credit cards, or bank accounts. Law enforcement still considers Bowman a person of interest, but lacks sufficient evidence to move forward with charges. The town of West Chesterfield remains a quiet, picturesque place, but beneath its peaceful exterior lingers the shadow of an unsolved mystery that has haunted residents for over 2 decades. Anyone with information about the disappearance of Tina and Bethany Sinclair is urged to contact the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit in hopes that one day, justice will be served. Dorothy Bois was last seen on the night of October 3, 1973, at her home in Nashua, New Hampshire. At the time, she lived with her husband, Kenneth N. Bois, and their young daughter in the 100 block of Kinsley Street. Dorothy, a young mother in her early 20s, had been married to Kenneth for just 2 years, but their marriage was already falling apart. Kenneth had filed for divorce the month before she vanished, citing irreconcilable differences, and the couple was undergoing significant marital stress. Dorothy herself was also struggling with personal issues, particularly the serious health problems of her child, which had left her in an emotionally vulnerable state. She had confided in her mother that she was afraid for her life, though it is unclear what or who she feared. According to Kenneth, the evening of October 3rd was like any other. He claimed that he and Dorothy were watching television together until he fell asleep at 11:30 p.m. When he woke up sometime later, Dorothy was gone. He would later tell police that there was no sign of forced entry, and it appeared as though she had simply walked out of the house on her own. However, she left behind all of her personal belongings, except for her pocketbook and a small white flowered beaded change purse. These small details painted a conflicting picture. Had Dorothy willingly walked away, or had something more sinister taken place? Kenneth reported his wife missing at 4:13 a.m. the following morning, just a few hours after he claimed to have realized she was gone. Despite his early report, police at the time did not consider Dorothy's case suspicious. No extensive searches were conducted, and given the era, her disappearance was not initially treated as a potential crime. Dorothy had a history of struggles. She had dropped out of high school during her sophomore year after becoming pregnant, and her older child, a son, was living with her mother rather than with her and Kenneth. These details may have contributed to law enforcement's initial assumption that she had left voluntarily. However, Dorothy's mother adamantly disagreed with this theory. She was certain that her daughter would never have voluntarily left without contacting her family, especially given her deep attachment to her children. Decades passed without a single letter, phone call, or sighting, strengthening the likelihood that Dorothy had met with foul play. Adding to the suspicion surrounding Kenneth, He went through with the divorce proceedings despite Dorothy being missing. The divorce was finalized after her disappearance, and by 1974, he had remarried. His second marriage later ended in divorce, but the fact that he had moved on so quickly raised eyebrows among those who suspected him of knowing more than he admitted. For over 3 decades, Dorothy's case remained cold. With no body, no crime scene, and no strong evidence, authorities had little to work with. It wasn't until 2007, when Nashua police reopened the investigation, that new attention was brought to her case. Unfortunately, by that time, both of Dorothy's parents had passed away, and the whereabouts of her son were unknown. Investigators have never publicly confirmed any suspects, but foul play is now strongly suspected. The lack of any financial activity, communication, or sightings in the decades following her disappearance supports the theory that she was likely murdered on or around the night she vanished. Given the circumstances of her troubled marriage, Kenneth's quick remarriage, and Dorothy's statements about fearing for her life, some theorists believe that her husband may have played a role in her disappearance. However, in the absence of physical evidence, no charges have ever been filed. Another unanswered question in Dorothy's case is where she was allegedly headed if she left willingly. If she truly left in the middle of the night, where was she going? Was she meeting someone? Did she leave out of fear? Or was she forced to leave? Did someone pick her up? Or was she taken against her will? Despite renewed interest in the case in 2007, no new major leads have been revealed to the public. Given the amount of time that has passed, and with potential witnesses aging or deceased, the likelihood of solving the case decreases with every year. However, advancements in forensic technology, including DNA analysis and geospatial crime mapping, could potentially uncover new evidence if investigators were able to re-examine any preserved materials from the case. The key mysteries surrounding Dorothy Bois' case remain. Did she leave on her own that night, or was she taken against her will? Why did Kenneth file for divorce just 1 month before she vanished? If Dorothy was afraid for her life, who was she afraid of? Was there evidence in their home that police failed to preserve in 1973? Could someone still come forward with information that could solve the case? Though it has been nearly 50 years since Dorothy Bois disappeared without a trace, her case is still open, and law enforcement urges anyone with information to come forward.